Warm welcome to all of you. I'm Sunil here. I'm the session manager. With me, my team will help you during the session. Before we start, just a few points. I think you would have already heard it in the keynotes. The sessions are supposed to be interactive. So please ensure that you can do a tweeting, you can ask questions as you wish. Be open. It's all candid discussions. Be open with your questions. Please come out with all the questions that is possible. In fact, we are going to award the best question, so don't hesitate to ask any questions that you have in your mind. Let's get started. I am pleased to introduce you Professor Jayashree. Professor Jayashree is going to be the moderating for the session. Professor Jayashree is Principal Consultant at Alchemy Management Consultancy Private Limited. She is a postgraduate in economics, rank holder from Mumbai University, and chose to be a human processor facilitator. And she has quite a lot of certificates she has acquired in this. The certificates include ICF Accredited Associate Ericsson Coach, NLP Practitioner, Myers-Briggs, and many more, to name a few. In the last 10 years, Ms. Jayashree Kirtane has contributed to over 10,000 professionals' journey towards self-actualization. I would like to please join your hands in applauding Jayashree. Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks, Sunil, for keeping it short and sweet. So I have here with me a distinguished panel of speakers, and there is an interesting common thread that I saw when I read their profiles, and that includes me too, that all of us are NLP practitioners, and some of them have also mastered the art of hypnosis. So I hope that you have all you have all come in here in your right mind, and I hope that you will go out in your right mind. What we do with your mind and how we mess up with your brain in the next 1 hour, it's all your responsibility. You have made a choice to come here. So they are all distinguished panel of speakers, and I have great pleasure in welcoming Mr. Johnny Joseph first, sir. So more than about 35 years 35 years of corporate experience spanning across, beginning with NIIT and quite a few of them with the ANZ as L&D head and IBM as L&D head, and then back to ANZ, and he's chosen to be an executive coach. The whole thing of adding value to what people do in their life is something that is what he concentrates now on. Then I welcome Professor Ranjan Kamath. Some of you who've been IPL students must be knowing him. And he's a communication specialist and communications coach at IPL right now. And he's a non-corporate entity coaching a lot of corporate people with qualifications from big schools like Trinity and London School. He has been contributing and making films in the documentary kind of sector on his own, as well as for many distinguished channels. I think the whole thing about influencing, which involves a lot of communication aspect of it, I'm expecting that he throws great light on that. Then of course Dr. Ushi Mohan and Mohandas, sorry. Ushi Mohandas. So she's a doctor and a doctor. So she's a medical doctor as well as a PhD in English. And it's a very, very rare combination to have. I think if we if I even attempt to by heart her CV, it will take me a complete one night and 1 day to by heart her CV. So I did not attempt that. What of course appealed to me is the way she balances many different aspects of her life in terms of being a practicing medical doctor, dental surgeon, as well as being a coach, as well as being being an activist, and she's pretty active politically as well, being a journalist, being a blogger, and being a motivational speaker. And her mantra is, if I can do it, everybody else can, right? So that is what I think I'm looking forward to inspiring inputs from her. So let's get started. So how many of you are IPLites here? Some of you, right? Okay. So are you from the current batch now, Rajesh? 2013. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, my colleagues here suggested that, and since we have a really cozy set of audience, that it has to be interactive and we need to know what you need to know from us. It's very important. Only then the hour that we have, with each other becomes more relevant. But even before, just knowing what you want to know from us, what I want to first settle is, are we on the same page with respect to what do we mean when we say authority and what do we mean when we say influence, right? What are those definitions? Because these are finally just English dictionary words. And only when we sort of adopt it to our own lingo that we make meaning out of it. And each one of us may be carrying different meanings to the specific word authority and to the word influence. So I want to know from my panel members as to what is their definition of authority and what is their definition of influencing. What is it, that we mean when we say somebody is an influencer and when we say somebody is a non-influencer, right? So what distinguishes an influencer from a non-influencer in terms of his or her actions is what I want to know from them. And then we'll, of course, check with you as to what is it that in specific you want to know from them. So, Ranjan?
I find the word authority extremely interesting, and it is usually misused. People mean power. Okay? So this is about influence. Do I have the power that people don't question me, and then I can do what I want with that? Okay? Authority is something that you are given by the people that you work with, okay? Or given that by the people that allow you to lead them. That is my definition of authority. So authority is something that you earn. Right? An example is someone like Nelson Mandela. Okay? You are elected to a job, but the first question is, okay, you got there. Are you competent enough to do the job? Right? That's when you start earning your authority. So you only get to the position first. Thereafter, you have to earn your place. Okay? So that, in short, is where I come from vis-a-vis authority.
I've never thought of defining these two, but having raised this question, what comes to my mind is that authority creates subordinates. And oftentimes they are not voluntary, it's out of choicelessness. Whereas influence creates followers, and it's through a voluntary process. And I've seen many times, in many occasions, that influence over a period of time creates a form of authority which is 100% voluntary followership. That's my view on this.
Well, let me please ask you a question. How many of you are married in this audience? Right. How many of you are not married? How many of you are happy? Right. So, well, for those of you who are married, you would understand the word authority and influence very well. Either you exercise it or you know about somebody who exercises it. I'm not sure about the word because I'm not somebody who believes in the power of word alone. One word means different things to different people. But for me, it's about, does someone invest their faith in you? Does someone believe you care about them? And I think faith and care will endorse authority for me. Because I have worked with students, I've worked with the people such as yourselves in good organizations. I have also had a bunch of colleagues who would love to hate me, but who would love to believe in what I do. It just means that irrespective of your position, as a person, if I mean well and I'm willing to share, I think authority comes in automatically. Authority is not for me something either endowed or bestowed or given to me. It is something like the previous panelist just said, something I've earned through sheer experience, through honesty, and through having to prove my integrity and credibility to people. It just comes by. It's a side effect of you doing what we need to do every day, single day, maybe years and years. For some, we are lucky. Maybe because of social media, tomorrow you become a hero. but I'm not the kinds who believes in that instant success. So I think that authority for me is just being who you are and taking yourself to the next level of you, and the other person will automatically relate to you because they need to go to the next level of them as well. That's all.
I mean, as expected, I'm hearing three different views on what is the definition of authority, and I'm sure when the title for this session was coined, I think the word authority was used in the context of the organizational thought. Where do I belong? What is my title? Am I called a manager or a senior manager, a vice president, or what? Right? So, I think I have to do that. Yeah, I think when the title was coined, I think the word authority was used in the hierarchical authority terms, and that is what even I had in my mind when we say all responsibility and no authority. Whereas what we hear from my friends here is there is very little difference between authority and influence in that sense, right? I mean, you might get there, but you need to earn it. What I also liked, what George said was that, I mean, it creates subordinates, right? So it is the whole pyramidal structure that we are talking about when we are talking about authority. Whereas when we are talking about influence, we are actually talking about people willing to and voluntarily following you, right? And how do we earn that? I mean, in the product management world, as much as I understand through my association with my friends, as much as I understand, in this world, I think many of the people who are in the product world, they may not have fancy titles in the organization in which they are working. At the same time, they need to do their job, and for doing their job, the whole influencing quotient has to be extremely high because the stakeholders that they are trying to influence may have much fancier titles than them in that organization. And if I get intimidated by the titles of my stakeholders, if I get intimidated by the aggression that sometimes my engineering organization might throw at me, then I always will have a choice, to just take a step back and not do the entirely right thing. And that's exactly the dilemma that many of you would be finding yourself in, is what is my suspicion. So when you read this title and when you chose to come into this room, what is it that you expected to hear from the panelists? Sorry? Lot of belly aching. Okay. Is what you expected to hear?
We walked in here saying, oh, let's sit through this session because there will be a lot of fun, because there will be a lot of
Okay. Anyone else?
The typical dilemma is you have responsibility, and most of the times you don't have the necessary authority.
Yes.
Okay, at a particular stage. Same thing, I have a authority, but I give a lot of responsibility to my subordinates, but then they are now stuck at a different stage because they require my approval at a particular stage.
Absolutely.
How to resolve? I think that is the topic, rather than just defining what is authority and all, which we are aware of. It is, you have a responsibility, but you don't have authority. That is the dilemma. How do you deal with that situation? If you can clarify that with some case studies and all, it will be useful for us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You actually have to interact with a lot of teams whom you hardly have connect on a daily, on a daily basis. But then you got to influence them instantly. Once you reach them, it's just a matter of 2 weeks. When you start with conversing on the terms of the stories that you want to create, in terms of the requirements that you want to create, influencing them quickly. It's not about authority there at all. It's not about they report to me. None of them, I do not report to anybody, and it's just about letting them understand what is the requirement. And sometimes when you ask them to do, it's a small bit of work for them, and they gain nothing out of it. As a teammate, they gain nothing. There's nothing new I'm learning. But I understand if I put that, the business is going to get a lot of benefit from it. So how do I influence them to do something that's not really required for them, but I get something out of it?
Right.
Hello. I guess most of us go through this phase in a career where you are in a role where you have external organization structure is in such a way that all the resources required to meet the stakeholder expectation is not essentially part of your team. But that's where your influencing comes into picture, where a portion of the team you have a direct responsibility, accountability, and authority, whereas there is a portion of the team where you have nothing but for influencing. How do you handle such situations? Because that to me is like very tricky situation to deal with, where you have a huge responsibility to meet the stakeholder expectation, but you don't have direct responsibility.
Hi, the reason I showed up for this session is of all the different sessions that are happening here, this is probably the most intangible in terms of touch and feel, but I think has the most profound impact on the outcome of what you do in your business, because it can be all the difference between making those conscious choices in your journey and sometimes just succumbing to what is the status quo. And I think of the few things that I've learned in this business, the ability to build consensus is so much more important at a point in time when there is so much ambiguity around and there is so much of disappointment that can crop up almost on a weekly basis. A lot of the things that you agree to do don't yield results on a weekly basis. This is not a weekly stock market tracker. Right. This is something that happens over a year, over 2 years. In that kind of a situation, how do you build consensus when it's not just the boss telling you what to do, but there's an entire team coming together and agreeing to build consensus? So in that sense, it's not so much about responsibility, but how do you influence a larger team to build consensus and take the right decisions? And I think it's a very intangible part of the whole product journey, often ignored, and so I wanted to show up and hear what you have to say.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So what I hear, if I were to quickly say, is also the speed with which I influence. It's not like I have a whole year to build relationships. It's just within those couple of weeks or a few weeks that I have to build those relationships, get things going, and get things going for the team and from the team who may not be the primary primary stakeholder. They may not consider that as their primary day job, right? But it is my day job. So, the entire, let's say the stakes that are involved are much higher for me than for them. So the speed as well as the whole relative stakes management. Second, as you also said that, there are so many things that are expected of me which are considered as my responsibility. But then there are the whole approval hierarchy or the authority thing. How do I overcome that in my mind first and only then in my action? What I hear you say, and I really like that, because it's not like, one time, cardiac trouble that we're talking about. It's like week after week and day after day when there are disappointments and setbacks that we suffer and we have to overcome them again and again. So what makes me going? What keeps me going? What is it that will keep me going and keep me wielding my influence more and more to finally get where I want to go? And I think in that whole thing, it is all clear in your mind, I'm only voicing it out, is that when I'm saying that as a product leader, I want to get it done, I think that I is actually connected completely to the purpose, It is not it is not me as a self who wants to get it done, but I want to get it done because I know it's good for the product and ultimately good for the organization. I think that purpose level alignment is there. It's about how do I communicate it to the others. So now therefore, my question to you especially, Johnny, is, in your career, I think spanning 35 years, there must have been instances where you must have dealt with some or many or all of these. And if you could share, what did you do? What helped?
I would like to share one of my experience, which kind of touches most of the questions, and especially the fact that it is intangible. This is the time when I moved into, the first time I moved into the call center business from a consulting firm. I joined a client of mine. I did a top management offsite for the top management, the CEO and his direct reports, and I ended up being part of the top management team. And my functional role was head of L&D, learning and development. Now, at that time, it was considered nothing great. I mean, it's part of HR. You're just supposed to do the initial training the pre-process training, the language, accent neutralization, and the product training, and then put them onto the operations seat and start earning revenue. So it was seen as a very mundane kind of a role, but because I had facilitated, I became the coach for the CEO, who was the first time CEO apart from being an investor, Mr. P.V. Kannan. So I ended up taking on that responsibility, and I had a team of 7 trainers at that point in time. And pardon me for giving you a little bit of detail because I just wanted to share how we can convert from just a not even authority. I mean, it's not even authority, but then how do we gain authority and influence? So I responsibility with 7 members on the training team, and we were asked to present for the first time when one new client was in India shopping with various call centers, trying to understand who is better, and they were doing visits. And we were asked to make a presentation under the HR umbrella about learning and development, and we made a presentation on what is unique about how we do this learning and development and bring people up to speed, whether it's to handle US clients, Canadian clients, Australian clients, British clients, and all the variations of accent. You know that within American accent, there is a wide spectrum of accent, differentiation, and so on and so forth. So we made a very intuitive, very scientific approach to this development, and we made that presentation. And then slowly but steadily, we figured out that the product team, the marketing team, would only schedule a new client visit depending on our availability. Because slowly we began to be the only differentiator for 247 because routers and dialers are the same in every company, whether it's Transworks or 247 or ICICI OneSource, everybody has the same technology. What differentiated 247 from the rest of the competitors is our approach to learning and development. And we realized that our influence over the entire company and to bring in new business was suddenly so huge. So we stumbled on it accidentally because we said we need to have a scientific approach to accent learning, which means that when they are in a pub, they will not use American accent or British accent. They will use it only when they wear the headset. And that is how we were able to earn new customers. And the product team started defining L&D as the silver bullet to get new clients. I'm just giving you an example of how from a mundane L&D training department to being a silver bullet of the company to be able to win new customers. And we were supporting the product department in defining that product.
No, thanks, Johnny. I think this is something, and as an HR, as a consultant, we interact with so many L&D people in corporates, and a lot of L&D professionals just end up being calendar setters. That's what they do, right? And contrasting to that, I think what I hear you say is the expertise and also the results. Expertise and the actual business results would earn you that respect, whichever function you belong to. Is what. Yeah. So Ranjan, I think you come from a very different field, and so I think your story would be something really different, unique.
Yeah, I guess in the creative field, both in drama and in cinema, it's about working with people who all believe the cat's whiskers, right? So you are bringing people who are extremely creative, egocentric, and where your individual authority really doesn't matter. The title is of no consequence. Right? So you may be director, but you're working with another director of photography, you're working with an art director, and you're working with all these people, and you have to get them all onto the same page, share the vision, and own that product, whatever it is, a film or a theater project or whatever. So I think there's no better place no better space where you see this in practice, the management of people, than in the performing arts. And I think the important thing is 2 things. One is that you know yourself, okay? You start from that platform. You know yourself enough to then say, I don't know. Okay? Because when you say, I don't know, okay, then you are secure enough to actually listen to other people, to get them to contribute. Okay? And as soon as people contribute, as you said, the word consensus, right? There is only one option, consensus, not compromise. Everyone has to own that product, whatever it may be. Okay? And it takes time. It can be head-breaking, it can be a headache, right? But you have to do it. There is no shortcut. Okay? So that is that is the story. Get people to own it. How are you going to create a win-win situation? What's in it for me? Right? Is it merely my professional mobility? Right? Am I going to get get a higher pay packet doing this? So whatever, but you got to find out what's going to drive those people over the next 2 weeks. So and that's the long and the short of it. You get to work, and I think through experience, you find out pretty fast. So there is no shortcut to gaining the experience to find out what's going to make people tick.
Right, thanks, Ranjan. And I think you hit a very important point. First is knowing myself, and then also listening. So talking is important, but stopping to talk is also equally important. Also, what I hear you say is, just to reverberating with what she was saying, is that I think whenever you ask people or request people to do something, the first question that's going to pop up in their mind, whether they say it aloud or not, is what is in it for me? What is in it for me is the question that everybody would have on his or her mind, whether they say it or not. And are we listening enough and empathetic enough to know that this question is lingering in their mind? If I can find an answer to that question and connect with them at that level, that is going to probably, start ticking them. That's when it's likely that they will at least take one step forward. And what is it that will change from team to team and org to org?
I am of the firm belief that though we are physically very similar, we're mentally very dissimilar. And we tend to make friends with only the similar kinds. The first question we ask is, do you like rock music? And the guy says yes, and you're like, oh wow, me too. Suppose he says ghazal. That's the first form of disconnect. And in anything, whether you're with yourself or you're with others, I believe the strongest form of human connect is what we need to become practitioners of. If human beings connect, products follow. If human beings connect, work follows. If human beings are able to connect, in spite of not thinking the same way, ladies and gentlemen, I think what is intangible suddenly becomes tangible. And we start sensing it. And that's exactly what I believe in. It's called alignment in my dictionary. What I think, what I feel, and what I say cannot be different. If I do not like him, I might just keep quiet and sit next to him and smile because that's basic courtesy. But I will not look at him, smile and say, oh sir, how lovely to see you, when inside I wish he was dead. So that's called completely incongruous thinking. For me, thinking makes a person. And the loveliest part about thinking is we are so dynamic. We can change. We can change it very quickly. We are in a lifelong attempt to change other people. And if I ask to change myself, the first and the loudest answer will be a no from many of the people. They say, please don't overestimate your power to change others, and do not underestimate your power to change yourself. I believe that I have changed a lot. I changed in the nanosecond. I've been a brilliant student right through my academics, only by virtue of IQ. But I was also suspended in every suspension throughout my college. It means that I was equally mischievous. People excuse me because they said, oh, she's intelligent, so what if she's mischievous? But then later on, I realized that to live a wholesome life, you need not just look at success as one word. A lot of people in today's world are either chasing money or fame. In my definition, I chase contentment. I believe that that comes in only from some form of not only personal accomplishment, but professional. So for me, it's about alignment, it's about balance, it's also about having a great deal of fun, where not only the belly, but many other organs I can't talk about here starts aching. People don't smile anymore. Just look at ourselves. Even if I'm looking at somebody, it's like, I'm a big guy, I have no more smile at you. It's always dynamics, it's transactional. For me, the smile is a big connect. And I request all of us to just do this, because as a scientist, let me tell you, the biggest neurological trigger to human connect lies in the musculature around your mouth. The moment you stretch it, even unwillingly, and tell somebody, here, take it, and do that, believe me, the connect happens. So that's one secret I'd like for you to take away with you for today. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. They say that even if you're frowning, even if you're frowning while talking over phone, that can be almost heard. Yes, there's a question.
Just wanted to add to what Ushi was saying. It is just, she took the words away. So consensus is, I think we need to move far beyond consensus. And that's the word, very deep word that she used, alignment. And alignment is not always agreement. There could be disagreement, yet alignment. And that's what creates influence. I just want to share, I mean, I'm a person who shares a lot of experience. We had a situation in the bank where the people were absolutely kick-ass in achieving their SLAs. Number of applications completed, number of checks passed, and so on and so forth. Yet, the end customer, the branch, was not happy. And I'll give you two examples. And the managers who are managing this team were trying to crack this. How is it that we are meeting all our SLAs and yet we don't get customer satisfaction? What is it that we are lacking? And they started looking for it. And I had this group of people in one of my sessions, and I used this technique that Sir was talking about in terms of empathetic listening. So I asked these guys, what is it that went into these particular transaction where, you know, there is a branch in the rural part of New Zealand where one single customer had 75% of the branch's business. And because one check was bounced, he threatened to withdraw his entire account from our bank, which meant that we will rather close the branch because it's not financially viable to run the branch with 25% of the business. And we asked these guys who were responsible in returning the check. So, did he follow the rules? Yes, he did. Was there insufficient balance in that account where he issued the check? Yes. So, was he right in bouncing the check? Yes. So then I asked him, what else could you have done to save the situation? And I didn't give the answer. He said, I could have just picked up the phone and called up the branch in New Zealand and found out who is this guy, what is the situation, and perhaps he could have saved the situation, said, okay, can you ask the customer, he by mistake gave the check from the wrong account which didn't have enough balance. So to be able to think through, I mean, he has no business to think about the customer because he's not facing the customer. He's just a back office. The other situation was about a big dairy farmer who required a big loan. He had to, be paid, and the loan application was almost getting rejected. But the context was about 30,000 children in New Zealand. And when they figured out, oh, my job is not to fill certain forms or approve certain forms and achieve certain SLAs within that shift timing, but to make sure that 30,000 children have breakfast and they don't go hungry. And the moment they start thinking those ways, they look at, it's okay, I may take a little more time, TAT, turnaround time with the particular application, but my job sitting in Bangalore is to make sure 30,000 children don't go hungry. Or my job is to make sure that little rural branch is viable for the bank to continue to run as a branch and not by mistake let the customer go to NAB or Westpac. So this is how influence happens, and it's so intangible. You're absolutely right, sir. It's so intangible. You can't have what-if algorithms to be able to create influence. It's about, as he said, empathy. It's about, we have 2 ears and only one mouth, a constant reminder that we use them in the same proportion. Think, speak 1/2 of the time that you listen so that whatever you speak becomes really meaningful. And you guys are creating products and you are ambassadors of products. I mean, you can go the Steve Jobs way, or you can go the way of trying to be understanding what is going to make my end customer tick. It's not about what my CEO or my boss thinks about what I'm coming up with, is how am I making or enabling my end customer? And that goes beyond the performance management 12-month cycle that we all fall trap into. It's beyond that, because you are increasing your intrinsic value as a professional, whether you get that 15% rise with the performance bonus or not is immaterial. In my 35 years of experience, I have had cases where I've been rated as 4, which means manage out. And I've also been knocked on my door and said, hey, listen, we must give you another 85% hike because we undervalued you while negotiating your salary, because you brought in so much of business to the company. So all of this is part of your entire, it's part of my entire 35-year life. I never lived one performance management cycle after the other, which I see a lot of people fall trap into.
Excellent. Yeah.
I'm going to, present a contrary opinion for your consideration. The word alignment, okay? If I had to coexist or cohabit with people who were like me, I think it'd be very boring. If you're listening to the same music all the time, right? It's not very enriching. And I think it promotes conformity. It promotes intolerance. So then I like and I form a clique, and then there are those who don't, you see? So I automatically, the chemistry within a team starts showing fractures. Okay? Therefore, I have a problem with the word alignment. It works, it's a temporary state of mind. Okay? Convergence. Convergence accepts that we come from different points of view. Convergence accepts that I respect you. Convergence accepts that what am I going to get from it? I am going to get another perspective which enriches me. Okay? And I think that if you use the word convergence, right, it really helps in building ownership. Right? Because in the designing of a product or whatever, right, not only have I done that, but I have learned from everyone else in the team about myself, about a process. And so everyone goes away with a terrific win-win at many different levels. So, as I said, alignment is, works when we're all heading towards the same direction for a particular period of time. It can work with a particular number of people, right? But it's not enriching over the long term. So do think of the different structures. Do I want all of us travel in the same straight line, heading towards the same horizon? Or do we want to converge and find something different when we get there?
So in case I do a talk, let's say, promoted to a department head, people listen to me and do things, but more to get it done right, how do you lead by influence when you have authority? I don't want to use it all the time. It's to influence them and get the right result. What tips you can give us?
You have authority, but you don't want to use it.
Don't want to use it because I don't think the results are right.
That is, you don't want to be a coercive leader, is what you're saying. And how do you become an influencer? In fact, my question that I was just going to ask is, I think we heard in the keynote session, what differentiates men from boys. And one thing that was discussed there was about how do we handle ambiguity. Now, if we ask the same question in this context, what differentiates men from boys is probably the influentiality index. And if you have that at a high level, then probably you don't need to be a coercive leader. So that's precisely the question that I want to ask my fellow panelists as to if you were to, let's say, talk about just top 1 or 2 things that product leaders must have or must imbibe so that they become differentiated, distinguished influencers, whether or not they have authority.
Yes. That, and it was a point I was trying to make for a while now. Leading by influence is not intangible. I think it's palpable. It's palpably tangible. The one skill set you need to be able to influence, and as you rightly said, to make that difference is something called negotiation. No organization teaches you negotiation. You're put into managerial position, but they don't upskill you in terms of negotiation. The other area where no management takes responsibility to upskill is no one teaches you organization behavior. I think every employee needs a disruptive 3-month course in organization behavior. Okay? Nobody, not even MBA schools teach you. In most of the MBA schools, organization behavior is taught by one teacher whom nobody wants. In engineering colleges, it's taught by the mechanical engineering professor. To my mind, the central theme of management is OB. If you get these things right, if you get your OB right, and if you upskill your people in negotiation tactic, I think this session would be superfluous. You wouldn't need to sit and talk about this session at all. You know? Sorry, just wanted to make that observation.
Might I respond to that? Could we exist in a hierarchical society where we do not like, we were taught don't ask questions, conform, right? So we are actually debilitated from being able to enrich each other to ask questions. We're too scared. That's why we actually like to work within an authoritarian framework. That's why we have a discomfort with this whole concept of authority and can I ask a question or how do I frame the question, right? So the question is, I feel that if I frame a question, if I ask a question, I'm being disrespectful. And that is a problem. That is a problem that a lot of people face, right? And the question is, if I'm asked a question, how dare you? You know, who the hell are you to ask me a question because this is my position? Right?
He spoke about experience of 20 years, and we also heard about negotiation. And thank you for raising that. As you leave, I want to thank you for raising that point. See, influence is a whole lot of negotiation. And you can't, again, like, it's not algorithmic. Whatever negotiation I've learned in, or I've taught in sales training program is kind of algorithmic. But the negotiation that she was talking about is in the here and now. And so to answer your direct question about being in a role and how do I get the whole team to be influenced to produce the outcome, and we started off talking about this 20 years of experience, and my learning, and today I'm sitting at 35 years, I know that what I do not know is far greater than what I thought 20 years ago. And that is experience for me. And if I don't flaunt 35 constantly with my team, and that is bringing about experience to its leveraging point, and to be able to give the team. Now, there was a time when I was asked to head a team of HR professionals, and I've never led an HR team. And I had people who had worked in HR who were reporting into me. And all I said was, listen, I do not know anything about HR. I'm here because of my tenure and my seniority, and that means nothing to be able to produce what HR has to produce. And I just relied on the team and I said, you guys have to teach me what HR is all about. I can probably mentor leadership skills for you. And believe me, in that 2 years, I learned a whole lot of HR from my subordinates. And today, you can talk to them and they'll say that was the best part of our thing because we were so empowered to do what we wanted to do. And I always committed to them that if you do something right, you will be put on the pedestal. If you do a mistake, I will take blame and we will go into the learning from that. And if that is the tip, that's what I have to offer.
So one, yes, please.
Then he gets followers. So that was all in the Iliad because the Greeks do not believe in authority and hierarchy. So I think we should have focused on that the organization has to be fair and the leader has to be fair. The reward system has to be fair. I think that solves all the problems. Thank you.
Thank you. So sensed, I'm only voicing it, is that we are talking of a lot of characteristics that we are saying a product leader must possess in order to be influential. And for that matter, any leader. Because we are talking about it in the PLF context, we are saying product leader. Leadership cuts across all functions and all sectors. And it's almost kind of a Purna Purush is what we are expecting out of a product leader. So he must be humble, and he must also wield influence. He must have experience, but he must also bring in new ideas, right? He must also know when to talk. He must know when to not talk. He must know how to listen, and he must know how to, sometimes give in to people's expectations and sometimes hold back steadfastly and say, this is it, this is what we want, because this is what is going to ultimately satisfy the customer. So we are actually talking about a lot of, bipolar characteristics, and that makes me again wondrously admire the job that most of you are doing on a day-to-day basis. So I think a pat on the back for each one of you is in order. Right.
So,
Yes.
I just want to share my experience in this as he getting solutions to the engineers, and there was a big rebellion, of course, about that. Then the reality set in that as a PM, I cannot be the problem solver. What happened was, because we had the phenomenal engineers who are big problem solvers. What got them out of bed in the morning was they wanted to feel that they are solving the greatest problems on earth, right? And what I had to do was enable them, pose a problem in such a way that they solve the problem, pose the constraints of the customers, because I understood the customers in such a way. Similarly to talking to sales guys, these guys are saying, without this feature, we cannot sell. The understanding, so what I did not understand is, if they miss a deal, right? If they don't make the quota, they are going to be fired, right? So understanding what people's motivations is the most fundamental thing before you even try to lead anybody. If you want to influence, you have to know what's in it for me. Everybody is going to look at what's in it for me.
I think it is the 18th camel. You must have read that anecdote, right? It is the 18th camel that product leaders are expected to bring into the discussion. If there were only 17 camels and we were to divide them in 1/9 and 1/3 and 1/2, then it's impossible. But only when you bring in that 18th camel, that is the exact perspective that you will bring into the discussions, because you are neither on the engineering team, nor are you on the sales team. So you are the one who's bringing in that extra, completely macro, different perspective, and hey, below the solution emerges. Sir, I think I would like you to do the closing remarks, because we are already past our time.
Okay, I am Dr. Balaji Singh. I am Dean of the PES University, with whom we are doing Executive MBA program. You must be aware of that. Okay, in my long years of experience of 4.5 decades, being a CMD, ED and all those things, I have realized finally two things are required for ensuring this: responsibility and authority and all that. The two things is that, one, you find out the talents of your subordinates, who is capable of what, and give him mostly those type of responsibilities. And then second point is, however talented you are, however knowledgeable you are, you will get stuck at a particular point. When you get stuck, you must have a solution for that. Just one example, I'll have plenty daily examples, right from 8 o'clock to 7 o'clock every day. Every half an hour I will be having somebody or the other sitting with me, you see. So only one example, because time is short. We have a professor who is a PhD in statistics, and he was a failure as a teacher, and almost that he was about to be sacked, I should say. But then I realized he is a Six Sigma black belt. So we have got industry institution interaction, lean management consultancy. We are the only one in the entire country doing that as MBA department. So I thought, why not I put him in that responsibility. Also, he is not an engineer. He doesn't have the background of engineering, but he is good on statistics. So I just put him along with an engineer. So he went around for 2 weeks. Now he is excited and doing a magnificent work. He is a big success. Okay. And second thing is, an escrow account had to be opened for this lean manufacturing consultancy. And he didn't know how to open an escrow account. We went to the banks. Bank managers did not know how to open an escrow account. I went to Union Bank, I went to Canara Bank. They don't know what is an escrow account. Then I had to do a lot of homework. I have background because I have CMD and ED and all that. What is an escrow account? Then they went and opened a SB account. I told the manager, how can you have a escrow account, SB account? It has to be a current account. He said, no, sir, possible. You just give a letter, we will convert. Okay, let me see. Gave a letter. It cannot be done. Okay. So that problem is getting resolved. How to open a escrow account? I must have a solution. If I simply shout at him, go and open a escrow account. I don't know how you open a escrow account. Not possible. Like that, umpteen things will come. You must have solutions for all those things. Only one more example.
No, thank
Just
you.
the last
We
example.
are keeping them away from the next
Just one
session.
example. We are doing a research on water portability and water literacy. And they didn't know in a particular belt how to get the questionnaires filled up and brought. I myself have gone, distributed the questionnaires, got them filled up and collected back. Like that, we have to do hand holding for our subordinates. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, sir.
Thank you one and all. It has been a very enlightening session. Really awesome session. Thank you very much. And thank you audience for keeping it very highly interactive. May I request Prof. Jayashree to identify the best question, probably, what you feel. May the person stand up, please. And please come forward, sir, to have the award.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Jayashree, for moderating the session. Thank you so much. This for you. I would request Prof. Jayashree now to hand over the mementos to the panelists. One last note to the audience, please don't forget to fill the feedback form. It has been kept also outside near the box. Please fill it. It is very much required for us to ensure that we continue to improve the sessions. Thank you so much.